So we're here today to talk about horse racetrack design and delivery, specifically in Saudi Arabia. My name's Collier and I'm Technical Director at STRI.
And my name is Colin Lyons and I'm the General Manager of STRI Arabia.
So I guess firstly we want to talk about designing racetracks, what are the different aspects involved in terms of material selections and other key constraints and considerations.
Well, Lee, we've discussed this at length over the last number of years, particularly in places like Saudi Arabia, but further afield in the United States, and all of the work we do with British racehorsing as well. I suppose first and foremost, we go back to the critical design components, which are those materials management practices that we put in place, particularly on root zones, sand types, even down to the type of water we use.
Mm-hmm. When we're looking at the design and delivery of a racetrack, we're looking at a homogeneous surface and something that a surface that we can manipulate performance using agronomic means. But fundamentally, we're looking at compliance with different governance in terms of shape, levels, falls, all of that kind of stuff. But above all else, we're trying to provide a very safe surface because that's for the horses, and that's fundamental to what we're looking to do.
Taking safety into account, Lee, you mentioned the word course manipulation and homogeneous surface, and that comes from ultimately being able to create what we want in any given area on the track. As you say, homogeneous, we want to do that uniformly. We don't want to create a particular style of going in one race line on the track. We want to be able to do that all over the track and ensure that wherever we race or wherever a horse plants its hoof, that it is the same characteristics everywhere it lands.
For sure. I think it's really important that so uniformity is at the base of everything we do, right from the time that we start the process, and looking at materials, the way that the track's put together in terms of its design, understanding the constraints of the site in terms of topography, and making that the track that we deliver sort of fit within the constraints of that site, and be mindful of delivering that kind of uniform surface at the end. That's absolutely key. It'd be probably quite interesting to talk a little bit about the background of the racetrack in Riyadh, King Abdulaziz racetrack in Riyadh.
Yes, I suppose historically we goes back to 2019. I think when STRI were asked to come in by on behalf of Prince Bandar bin Khalid Al Fazl to come in and do a study on implementing a turf track into an already quite popular and historic track facility. And works were undertaken there in feasibility all the way through to design and ultimately design build, where STRI catered for absolutely every part of the journey that the track went on.
Yeah, so I guess that whole conversion of that facility into a turf racing surface in the desert is absolutely unique as well. That had never really happened. The project was, and the racing season in Riyadh is such that it fell at a time when it was very difficult to provide a warm season turf track for year one, and we were pushed into a scenario where we had to consider other turf grass options, and what we ended up going for is something that is absolutely unheard of in the region, really, and it's absolutely unique. I can't think of another example of a cool season only sports surface that's run in the Middle East. But year one, we were hamstrung by construction constraints, and the only option was really to look to put in a ryegrass dominated sward for the track, which I think it took about 12 weeks in that first year one to establish.
Yeah, indeed, 12 weeks. And what's funny from that I suppose, being forced into a situation because of time constraints and everything else, is the learnings STRI have taken from being able to provide that first year ryegrass turf system in the Middle East. And we've evolved, and the track has evolved since then. We've taken that on board, the success of year one, added research to it, and have now come up with specific cultivar selections for the region during that race period, which is really, really interesting, as I said, because it's still unique, even though it's evolving for us from a research perspective. It's unique insofar as it's a cool season grass in the middle of the desert, in temperatures of 35 degrees plus at times.
So it probably just a little bit of explanation around that, actually. So racing doesn't actually start until late December, the season, and finishes in March. March. So it's actually quite a constrained period of time, and it happens to coincide with when temperatures drop off slightly in that part of the world, which offers us an opportunity. Obviously, warm season turf grasses take significantly longer to establish and mature. Cool season grasses in the temperatures that we have in Riyadh from September to November will establish incredibly quickly. They get an absolutely rapid growth response, and that enables us to grow in quite a quick time, quite a mature surface for the racing. And so in doing so, year on year, we've learned how better to do that. As Colin said, using our understanding that year on year has increased. We've been able to optimize our approach in terms of the delivery of the project, looking at different cultivars, looking at slightly different timing, looking at different levels of amendment in the upper part of the profile, in combination to sort of try and eke out additional racing time for the jockey club. And that's where they want to get to year on year, is extending that racing period.
Yeah, the argument could be made by many in the industry that the ideal solution there would be a warm season turf transition during our race period. But for the same token, that turf track is unused now, and will be unused until next December, until the temperatures are correct for horse racing in that region again. So there's a sustainability aspect within all of our designs and solutions for the Jockey Club in Riyadh, in terms of water consumption, track usage, inputs, etc. So the decision has been made to kind of keep it as a cool season grass, but use our information that we've gleaned over the last number of years to eke out another couple of weeks either side of their historic turf season. And we've done so successfully, and year on year we're getting more and more out of it. As you know, I'm on the ground all of the time during that period, so can see it firsthand from that very first, cracking of seed all the way through to the finishing up with going through Saudi Cup, finishing off the season, but being able to sustain our cultivar selection for an extended period of time, when quite honestly we thought we couldn't, So it's been quite an interesting journey, and I'm looking forward to next year to see how much more we can play with our cultivars in terms of heat tolerance, drought, salinity issues where they do arise, and provide that fit for purpose surface that the turf industry requires from a safety perspective. And again, going back to that safety aspect, our ability to create that surface with the cultivars in question in that high-end, deep root mass that we create to provide the footing and the going required in that part of the world is actually, again, a very, very unusual thing to do.
And it's changed, hasn't it? Because year one was ryegrass, and last year we used Polyprotensis, got meadowgrass, got Kentucky bluegrass as it's otherwise known, which let us eke out. It's slightly more heat tolerant, so it let us eke out that establishment window a little bit further still, and provided a much more robust racing surface, I would say.
Yeah, hugely so. Yeah, and I think that the success in that comes from the timings between your power going in the ground and that time when you oversaw it again with rye. Bearing in mind we don't put them in together, we do it at separate times. So the Kentucky will go in first. Let that take, let it become the predominant grass, and then oversow with our rye. And I think that the strength in it comes from that lateral growth and rye zones from that Kentucky is actually a huge part of the success of the racing track in Riyadh.
The irony is, I guess, though, that like after we're talking about late September when we're sowing the seed, racing on it in December. By the time we finish in March, it's probably super strong, the bluegrass. And I was on site last week actually. We went to have a look, and although it's incredibly hot now, it's like 40 degrees, and the thing's pretty much brown. But in areas where the bluegrass is still getting water, it's still in fairly good condition. So it just goes to show if you did carry on water in the surface, you could extend the lifespan for longer. But that's a significant impact in terms of the amount of water and resource that we need to do for 6 months of the year when we're not going to put horses on it because it's too hot. So that's the rationale behind having that cool season only limited racing window, is that we can reduce the inputs, and that's got to be a more sustainable way of delivering a surface, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned water. Obviously, in that part of the world, it's a commodity. Luckily, on site where we've the luxury of having our own reverse osmosis plant, specifically there to provide the watering needs for all of the landscape, not just the turf and dirt track in question, but also the landscaping and everything else that's incorporated around the entire facility. And water, as you know, Lee, is key to providing that surface required for racing. Obviously, there's an awful lot more goes into it in terms of your cultural practices and ongoing maintenance, but water is absolutely key to the establishment, growing, health of the plant. But not only that, the actual race day or the race week water usage is up some as well to provide that stability and going required.
Yeah, that's actually quite interesting to talk about. Maybe that's something we can expand on a little bit, is just that kind of race preparation and the fact that now the surface our understanding of the surface is in a place whereby you can manipulate going, because you understand the limitations of the plant and also moisture values, and the interrelation of that information helps us provide a better surface and a surface that we can modify, if that's the right word.
Absolutely, yeah.
Around going and around racing requirements.
Yeah, and that's attributed to numerous factors, and one is agronomic health. How healthy is the plant, your root mass? If that's there, your ability to modify or manipulate that going is also created. Could you walk in the morning and decide what to do to the track? No, it's a case of having to be there. You need to know your track. You need to understand what's going on. And for me, Lee, as you know, it's got to a point where I can walk the track. But data is key. Data is absolutely key. We measure on an ongoing basis to understand our pintrometer readings, our Clegg readings, or going stick results. Inability to be able to call on the equipment on hand to, as you said, modify that surface to either slow it down, make it a little bit harder if necessary. And we do that with by utilising water also, So, as I said, through a series of measurements taken daily, weekly and charted, we can assess we can assess going on a given day and change it within about 3 to 4 days if necessary. Very important when you get to the point of Saudi Cup, which is the important day in the calendar. There's, as you well know, hours and hours and hours of time goes into walking, analysing, measuring, testing, in a bid to get that going to where it needs to be. And thankfully, after 3 or 4 years of this now, we're in a good place to be able to understand the track, understand our measurements, and take any one of those measurements and be able to amend the track surface. And that could be by altering something as simple as an aeration program, depth of tines, size of tines, the amount of heave, if we use it, to be able to manipulate it to a particular going, and bearing in mind that the going readings raise and lower in digits of 1, so it's very difficult to move at 1 digit, but we've got to that point where we can actually, judge the type of tractor we use, the type of aeration equipment, for instance, we use, the weight of the mowers we use on a weekly basis, and the height of cut, for instance, all have a massive bearing on what jockeys and horses expect to race on when they're racing. So
the data is really important, actually, because I think, and historically, year on year, having more and more data can sometimes cloud things, but actually we can really pick up trends and see correlations now. And I think, especially as our understanding of what the maturity of the bluegrass is towards when racing's starting, and as we move through the racing season, actually we have a significant amount of data, and we absolutely understand the correlation of that data. So it's not just data for data's sake. We actually can then start, we can pick trends, and then we can apply maintenance practice around that in order to bring values within certain thresholds that we're looking for. So I think that's really important, and I think the data and safety aspect is something that we're focused on as with in this track particularly, but on other projects that we're working on in the equine industry too, and just understanding or trying to get a level of understanding around consistency and what thresholds are there for safety. And it's something that our wider equine team are working with the BHA on in relation to defining performance characteristics for agronomy, but also what that means in terms of equine safety too, because the two are absolutely linked. But the whole equine industry is so complex, is that we're working on tracks with a sound root zone. That's predominantly what we design, because they're sort of using a very similar methodology for other sports pitches, and we know that works well. We know that we can control those tracks and the agronomic performance of those surfaces. In different parts of the world, tracks are built and maintained and constructed in very different ways, and therefore, those parameters for performance are very different in certain environments. So actually having a bunch of criteria which captures all that is incredibly complex. But that's something that we're kind of working around.
Yeah, and what you've just said is therein lies the challenges that the equine industry encounters globally, because I suppose historically racetracks were built on indigenous soils, and drainage is what it is, and hasn't been designed such. Anything that has been put in some of the older courses and facilities around the world is probably over the course of time, but never at the same time track wide. So what you do on a home straight this year might not get done on the back straight in 2 years' time, when funds and finance and everything that comes on stream. And they're harder tracks for us to manage, but they're very, very much more challenging. But again, like we said, we'll say a design and build of one of our own tracks with our own materials and materials management parameters that we impose upon ourselves, with data collection, we can still help with a lot of those older tracks. You know, it's about understanding. It's about understanding what's there, testing it, analysing it, looking at it, and providing a solution for potentially some facilities that don't have the funds of you know, some of our clients around the world. So, but it's interesting that's probably the biggest challenge within the equine industry, is that broad divide between one of our turf tracks in the Middle East or anywhere else in the world versus an older facility on indigenous soils with maybe a lack of drainage or maybe, you know, poor irrigation systems and irrigation networks, etc. And of course, manipulation and modifications of tracks for going on a given days. Sometimes you're at the mercy of the elements in order to meet those parameters. So,
for sure, it all comes back to homogeneous and uniform surface, isn't it? Not every track's going to have that
No.
sort of Rolls-Royce construction, but it's kind of like it's understanding. A lot of older tracks are put together in a piecemeal kind of way, so that you get areas that have been identified that need improvement, that have drainage issues or whatever else, and that tends to be how that they've been developed over the years. There's a number of courses that we've worked in across the UK that, you know, drainage infrastructure has been phased across a number of years, and you've got in many cases absolutely a huge variance in the type of solutions that are across these tracks in terms of the different levels of drainage systems they have in there. Some of them have got gravel rafts in certain areas of the track, and then you've got pipe and slip. Then you've got areas that are completely undrained, and then you've got different types of irrigation systems too. So and different types of soils in many cases across the UK too. So it's pretty complex trying to capture that and set criteria around all of that stuff, especially when we're in terms of having lots of data. We don't have that same kind of data for UK race courses that we would have on the tracks that we're working on a day-to-day basis, and we probably have a bit more knowledge of.
Indeed, yeah. And again, it says we have the, I suppose if you go back to Riyadh, we've control from the get-go, from A to Z on the entire logistics of racing there. So everything from our original scope of works through to watching, growing, measuring it, testing it on an ongoing basis, being there on race day. Feedback from jockeys is a huge part of it. All of the scientific and digital measurements we can take in the world sometimes won't measure up to what a jockey might think about what the surface was like, and we take that on board. Where we come in on a consultancy basis into tracks, we can test, assist, advise in terms of necessary works that maybe have to be undertaken, or certain tweaks in certain instances, not always huge changes. But it's incumbent upon individual teams to try and gather as much information on the track as possible. As I said, it goes back to the absolute understanding and knowing your track, in a bid to be able to get it to be as agronomically as strong as it can be, in order to succeed.
And I think it's a case of not overcomplicating it sometimes, because we often go into facilities and there's a degree of complexity around turf grass management that isn't necessarily always beneficial. I think going back to first principles, understanding what level of performance is achievable, and going back to tried and tested methods, and using the right types of turf grass in the right place. There's hundreds of years worth of R&D research around what particular types of turf grasses work in what climates, and And we day to day, that's something that we have a hands-on understanding of with the R&D that we do outside, and in different parts of the world as well. So obviously we replicate our R&D in Australia, but we have also done that in the Middle East too. And that gives us a lot of numbers and data, and I think that helps absolutely inform our practice. But I think there is a lot of mystery in the industry sometimes about what might work, and going back to first principles and knowing what does work and then applying it and tweaking and developing that is probably a good starting point.
It is, and you'll find that's global. There's everybody's doing a lot of the same things, but there's a bit of a divide between racing in North America versus racing Middle East, racing in Australia. And although we're all trying to achieve the same thing, there's a slight divide between the understanding and the parameters around turf care and what's necessary for race day in terms of going, and it's the understanding of it. And I think the industry could come together a little bit better in terms of having a global say and unifying those parameters, Lee.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have consultants. Pete Anderson works in the equine industry in Australia and works across a number of tracks and events in that part of the world, predominantly warm season basis. But, there is, between us, we have a lot of knowledge and information and data that we can share to help provide some real sort of progression within the industry.
Yeah, I think progression, and it's not people butting heads, by the way. It's just that people in different parts of the world are used to doing things in a different way, and I think given that it's a global industry with horses traveling all over the world to race, I think there should be a more concise effort to probably provide that uniformity across the board in terms of what's fit for purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be collaborative as well. I mean, there are lots of different areas of expertise in the equine industry. You have people who come at horse safety and equine safety from different angles, and look at track safety in a different way, and then looking at ways to improve that. And I think we as a group working collaboratively to understand how to provide safe and high performing surfaces is in everybody's benefit, and to use each other's areas of expertise to do that.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. We've got friends all over the world involved in this, and our discussions on an ongoing basis are enlightening, actually.
Yes,
so
for sure.
It's and that's what's going to closing that gap. More conversation, more talk, chat, and interaction between different governing bodies and different entities, different superintendents across North America, for instance. Closes that divide and gives people a real thorough understanding of where we should be going with the industry.
So yeah, that kind of neatly leads us on to the growth of equestrian in the Middle East and probably in Saudi Arabia specifically. So and rather neatly on to STRI Arabia. So
STRI Arabia is something we embarked upon after the success of the last number of years in Saudi. I suppose starting with King Abdullah's Racetrack was quite a big one for us. But as you know, and maybe some of the listeners would like to know, that we're also involved in some high-end golf and a lot of stadium design work there at the moment, and have been for the last number of years. So the decision was made to create an entity in Saudi Arabia, specifically to furnish the sporting bodies there with our knowledge and expertise within the region. A lot of what we do is at client side at front end, so we come in at design stage, but we're providing that expertise at governance level and helping them out at early phases of projects, but also further down the line at PM level, where we're providing construction supervision expertise and materials management laboratory services to a lot of the high-end sports facilities that have been created. Particularly in keeping in mind that 2030 vision is quite a real thing in terms of sustainability, in terms of quality, in terms of Saudiization, and where everything we do is keeping that in mind.
The vision is really important, isn't it? Actually, we've been in a number of meetings with governance in country, and I think sometimes people are a little skeptical about what 2030 vision means and sustainability and growing pitches in the desert and all that kind of stuff. But actually, you actually, when we're involved in speaking with governance around some of the key factors in developing sports excellence in country, they're absolutely open to innovation and doing things in a different way and pushing the boundaries of our industry, which is fantastic, really. And also, they're not shy of looking at alternative solutions, whereas I think sometimes we have to justify the placement of innovation in sports turf, and everything has to be proven in especially in Europe. It's over years and years, and nobody's really pushes innovation right at the very forefront. It's always trickle down. But I think in Saudi Arabia, they're absolutely keen to push forward and to be seen to be the innovators. So absolutely at the moment, we're pushing things forward more in terms of what we do with design there than anywhere else on any of our other projects, because there is an absolute appetite to see sustainability, saving water and looking at pitch management in a more sustainable way than anywhere else, which I think is really quite cool.
It's encouraging. It's really, really encouraging. As you said, Lee, the amount of meetings that we would go to whereby it's really taken on board, and we've had so many and have so many innovative ways of being sustainable within our industry for many, many years, but it's getting people to buy into it and to make it real. And for the first time in possibly my career, I'm actually seeing a real interest in this. And funnily, it's sustainability is one of those key words, but it's very, very real over there. It's funny, we've a word for something we've been doing for the last 40 years anyway. We've been designing root zones, drainage systems, changing the parameters in a bid to either speed up or slow down the flow of water. And what we're doing now is taking the innovation we've been accruing over the last number of years and actually providing solutions for people who actually do see the benefit in it.
Applying it, I think that there's been this kind of almost like off-the-shelf approach to pitch design and pitch provision, rather than doing that due diligence based on a real understanding of climatic constraints and I think there's an opportunity in Saudi Arabia because the governing bodies are absolutely more open to that kind of approach.
Particularly since it's quantifiable. We can measure the benefits. We can show real savings in terms of, we take water, but it's not just water. It's everything from going back to what we discussed earlier in terms of cultivar designs and the inputs required around all of that. It can't be just water and energy. It has to be everything else has to be sustainable within that facility as well. And we've seen huge interest in some of the projects and people we've been chatting with in becoming self-sustainable, almost self-sustainable in terms of everything they do within their facility. And that's not just the football field alone, but it's everything within the whole surrounds and the precincts.
And that's key. It's almost seeing the precinct as a holistic opportunity to integrate technology to work together. I think water's really key in that too. And I think that's something we've seen that in Europe to some extent in buildings, maybe not necessarily on pitches. We've been involved in projects where sustainability and water have holistically been considered as part of the development. But I think in Saudi, that is the way that things are kind of configured. You know, there's a automatic assumption that we will build in a benefit in terms of sustainability wherever it's possible, and it's absolutely fundamental to the vision document. And of course, it's not just limited to Saudi Arabia. We're actually involved in a number of projects across the wider Middle East at the moment, and there are more and more actually developments in sport and across the region. In UAE, in Qatar, it's actually interesting that post World Cup Qatar, there's actually been quite a lot of development work going on, which you wouldn't necessarily have thought would have happened, but actually, and much of that is actually in equestrian. But across the Middle East, there's a real appetite for progress. There's a bunch of different developments happening, not just in Saudi, but in other parts.
Yeah, true, Lee, but both of us have been involved within the World Cup 2022 and design and construction of the stadiums and training facilities used for the World Cup. But again, what's encouraging is these aren't built just for the World Cup. There was a huge part of that which was legacy in mind and what's coming next, what's the next tournament. And all of the facilities that we were involved in are still heavily active in terms of other tournaments and local grassroots games and promotion within the industry to provide sport as a platform for something bigger in the Middle East. If you're to look at the experience and anything we can take from that, it's that sport will last for a long, long time. It's not just the tournament in question, and it's how you build on that. If you look at the progression of sports across the entire region, taking equine, which we just started to discuss earlier on, it's not just tied to Riyadh. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a landmass is huge, and racing is as popular as it is in Riyadh as it is in Jeddah and other parts of it. And we're seeing more and more interest in creating and providing design services for tracks and equine facilities across the entire kingdom, and not just the major cities.
There's a real network being built, and there's an industry around equine. It's not, whereas it was probably in pockets previously. I think the Jockey Club of Saudi Arabia and the other countries across the Middle East have really focused on delivering a proper, thought out circuit, similar to what you have in the UK or the US, whereby they can have their own race culture and develop that. That's a really cool thing to do.
Yeah, well, as the interest has risen, so has horse population, and the ability to be able to fill these tracks weekly is now easier for them to do, purely because of the interest across the entire region.
When the training facilities are being developed, I mean, it is, we keep going back to it, they're building a sustainable equine industry that will be able to serve itself. So the training facilities, the stabling, all of that stuff is there. That's all going to be developed as part of this, and it's a really very exciting space. The whole equine thing,
and very high quality training facilities as well. Lee, they don't want, they want to train on what they race on. So everything they want to emulate the best. They want the best of everything, which is really great for us, because it pushes us to provide more and to be at the forefront of anything innovative that is coming down the line that we can introduce into track design, polo field polo field construction, and it goes further than that. It goes all the way back to paddocks and walk lines from stables to track. So it's facility wide our services are used, and it's
really actually getting all that stuff right is really important too. And I think we have seen when we've been into certain venues that there are things to change and sort of improve upon. So you're always learning in what we do, which is great because you can take certain things into the next development and make sure that you're really progressing things there too. I think that's not just in the equine world. We do that in stadiums. We're involved in a bunch of stadium projects at the moment in this region with architectural teams. And again, that's the same kind of philosophy, is that we take what we've done previously, incorporate innovation and push things forward. And I think that's, there's a really great opportunity to sort of, with the ethos that's been pushed down from governance, to sort of come up with some really great solutions in this part of the world.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's across all of the grass sports that we're involved in. The growth of sports, across the nation is quite extravagant in terms of motor sport, e-sport, football events and entertainment centres, skiing, golf obviously is huge, with the potential for another 13 or 14 golf courses to be rolled out across the entire region. So they're taking it really, really seriously, and it's something that we want to embark on a journey with them on.
Great. Thank you very much, Colin.
Thank you, Lee.